Well, we're going to take a trip today to this museum, the museum of a famous Russian filmmaker in Yerevan, Armenia. The filmmaker is Sergei Parajanov. Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power, your Georgian. No, I'm not a Georgian, but I practically am, and I learned that I was on this particular trip. You're allowed to stay 365 days in Georgia. Then you have to make sure in that time you get your passport stamped. Then you can come back and spend another 365 days. So, it was getting close to the end of that period. Now, I had another ace in the hole, and that is I had gotten a temporary residence permit. And for some reason or another, I had a contract with a job that kind of ran out at the end of the year. So I thought, I'm not sure if I should just go ahead and cross the border and come back just to see. So what I decided, I was going to take a train trip from Tbilisi, Georgia to Yerevan, look at Yerevan, get on the train and come back. At first I thought I was going to go up there, spend the night in a hotel of some sort, or a bed and breakfast, or an Airbnb, or something. Bed and breakfast, I don't think they have those, but Airbnb. And then I would come back. But then I noticed that the train schedule was kind of odd, because they'd gone to a winter schedule, and the winter schedule was that on the odd days they would leave Tbilisi, and on the even days they would return from Yerevan. What that meant was, because it was an overnight train both ways, I could sleep all night on the train, and then I could come back, spend 12 hours walking around Yerevan, and then come back on the train that night. So essentially it was like a day and a half travel. Plus I would get a chance to, add a new country to my list. I think it's number 20. And not only that, but I had a chance to see what the borders were like and on the train. That was just going to be an interesting little trip. But I learned some interesting things along the way, including that I needn't have worried so much about my permit, because I never really looked at it before. But we'll talk about that later. So, without any further ado, let's get on the train. Well, I'm on the first stage of a mysterious adventure going to Yerevan, Armenia. And what's really interesting about coming here is the reason is I'm just going over the border into Armenia to get my passport stamped, and then to come back and to be good in Georgia for another 365 days. So right now I am alone in a double bed first class. I must say first class, this is obviously an Armenian train, and the people who greeted me were Armenians, my first Armenians, not in my life, but certainly on this trip. And so essentially, I'm going over the border, sleeping all night, hopefully, and then the next morning around 7 o'clock in the morning, I arrive in Yerevan. I'm going to spend the day walking around, and then, because the trains only go every other day, and I would have to wait 3 days to get the next train, I'm coming back tomorrow night on the train. So this is an experiment. I only have a one-way ticket right now because I couldn't buy the Yerevan back to Tbilisi ticket, so who knows what this is going to be like. It's just a total experiment. I'm looking forward to walking around in Yerevan, taking some videos, taking some photos, and we'll see what it's like. So meanwhile, this could be a very blurry photo, but, you get some idea. It's a small, cramped, dark room, funky, and that's all I can tell you. It's funky, but hey, it's a nice place to sleep overnight. I hope, unless who knows who shows up and takes my adjoining bed here. Hopefully I can avoid that. You never know. Okay, we'll call that the introduction to a trip to Yerevan. A strange trip to Yerevan. We'll see how strange it is. The most important things that have to happen is crossing the border, getting my passport stamped. Everything besides that is just icing on the cake. So one of the first things you should do as you're leaving the train station is look out the window towards Matatsaminda Mountain at the television tower. It goes by very quickly. And then settle in for a long night of sleep, which will be interrupted by 2 hours of customs and border. And then you'll arrive early in the morning. Now, this is in the winter. In the summer, there are more trains, and they arrive at different times with different light. But this is what it looks like when you're arriving in Yerevan, a little bit before 7 o'clock in the morning. So essentially, everything is dead, which is going to create some interesting conditions when you arrive. What was interesting was I'm totally disoriented. I couldn't read much of the Cyrillic script, and the Armenian script I couldn't deal with at all. But, as you can see, there was a market.
Hello. How are you, my friend?
And of course, this guy interrupts me and essentially says, "Hey, taxi!" They kept coming up to me with taxi ride, and it was very much a scam taxi ride. I'll tell you in a minute. But first, I was really attracted by this old Stalinist Gothic main train station, so I managed to film the main ceiling just in time to be stopped by policemen who told me it was illegal. But one of the reasons not to take the taxi rides is because the metro station is just below the train station, and this token here is only worth, 25 cents. It's a plastic token. This is as much as of the metro as I saw getting out at Republic Square. That's it, because it's also illegal to take photos in the metro. So immediately I started to get much more of a Soviet vibe about the place. Although this is Republic Square. It reminds me more of kind of a smaller version of, say, the Louvre right as it meets the Tuileries in Paris. Like I say, smaller, not quite as grand. Obviously not Paris, but pretty nice. As you can see, Armenia's got a much grayer feeling. Tbilisi feels like it's alive with people, but Armenia still feels like it's kind of caught in the Soviet past. And they have more of a relationship with Russia. Now, this is the History Museum of Armenia. It's the main national museum for history. It's also in Republic Square. I highly recommend it. This is as much as I got to photograph of it, what was out in front. They have these stels from the past, these Christian stels being these kind of square columns that you find in the ancient world. And the reason this is it is because, again, they wouldn't let you photograph in here. It seems like everything in Armenia is top secret. Now, I mentioned the scams at the taxi drivers beforehand. They were wanting to charge, $12, $15 for that 25-cent ride. It was just like, no, I'll wait. And in fact, finding change was a bit difficult. I did find it. There's nothing in the empty train station, but you can find it outside. You just have to look around and ask. Good luck. There was a woman who tried to scam me at this place as well. But some of these old statues, they're really cool. I'm glad they're outdoors, so at least I can get some photographs to show you. This is a place called Bucharest, and it was closed when I got there. They were having an electrical blackout, which says something. But this is probably the best bookstore in either Tbilisi or Yerevan. So if you're going to travel to Yerevan and you need some books, go to Bucharest. Here's a sample of the alphabet. Yeah, I've learned the Georgian alphabet, but this is a bridge too far. I'm not going there. Although I tried to make sense out of it, I would occasionally see English or Russian, and I would kind of compare them, and it just did not make that much sense to me. I've gotten to the point where I can recognize Georgian. This is something else. So you're confronted by a lot of this language. Fortunately, the Armenian people seem pretty friendly, if not as friendly as the Georgians. They are certainly not unfriendly. This is the kind of street that you see everywhere in Yerevan. There's some sort of tourist attraction in those, what look like gray silos, obviously Soviet era. But check out those buildings. Everywhere you go, there's these new buildings, like this one's just going up. New, kind of sterile, post-Soviet architecture. I'm sure there's some modern firm has been hired to do this, but not that interesting. Every now and then, though, I would see the kind of aesthetic decay I am so fond of in Georgia. Now, at this point, I am looking for the Sergei Parajanov Museum. And I found it. It's actually right on the street. There was a poster on the wall there. But also, I found the roof. Actually, it was maybe the name of some kind of club on top of this old derelict gray monstrosity of a building. And you look out here, this gives you a good feel for Yerevan in the winter. There's some sort of big sports coliseum surrounded by dead-looking modern architecture. What can you say about it? It's just absolutely dull. So let's go into the Parajanov Museum. Sergei Parajanov is easily one of the most important directors in the history of cinema. He's an Armenian, but he was born in Tbilisi, Georgia, spent formative years in Ukraine, and died in his mother country, you might say, of Armenia, in Yerevan, and helped actually to put this museum together in the last years of his life. Didn't live to see it completed. Got in all sorts of trouble with the Soviet government. It was actually sentenced to hard labor. Here are some images from some of his films, including Shadow of Forgotten Ancestors, The Color of Pomegranates, Ashik Karib, and what's the other one? Sayat Nova is The Color of Pomegranates. It's about a poet, and but basically these films are the ones that he is known for. He was only allowed to do a few films because the Soviets so hated his work. They accused him of aestheticism because his work is extremely aesthetic. But this was the whole reason. I wasn't even really, I knew I wanted to come here, but I didn't realize how much I would love this museum. This is an amazing museum of his art. There's some films occasionally showing here on little screens, but the important thing is he spent so much time not making films. He had a lot of time for other things. So there are photos of him. I just passed a photo of his first wife. And then you see these strange little boxes every now and then. Now what's interesting about the boxes is they often represent films that he was not allowed to make. I'll show you a bit more of one of those in a moment, but this one is definitely one of the films he never made, the one with these twins. There's a little shrine to him, you might say. What's great is all this stuff comes from him. All the knickknacks in this place, all the art, he either made it or adapted it. Here, this box here represents a film he never made called Dictator. Now what's interesting is if you watch his films, some of them, especially the color of pomegranates, feels like it's in a box. I mean, that is, the camera never moves. This was actually a German sculpture that someone gave to him. He added the cross around the neck, but I guess he just felt nice about it. It's nice it ended up here. But no, it's amazing how much is here. And in fact, I was surprised. I'd spent maybe 45 minutes looking, and then they said, "Oh yeah, there's a second floor." And I met this really wonderful woman, another box for a film never made. I met this wonderful woman who was one of the tour guides there named Nare, and she guided me around, told me much more about, she was the one that told me about the boxes, told me about, I mean, a lot of these are his paintings. He made a lot of collages, like that's kind of a box collage. Not sure what this is, but quite interesting artwork there. And he was a Christian. He was, I believe, Armenian Apostolic Christian, which is slightly different than Orthodox. They would say very different. Nevertheless, he took his faith fairly seriously, and at the same time, not seriously. It's hard for me to put that all in a box, but a very interesting guy. For him, life was filled, like these are actually things from his house, the table and everything. This is not where he lived, though. This is just where they found this place for him, and he approved of it, and then they put a lot of his stuff there. Again, he would take dolls. The puppeteer in me loves the fact that he would take dolls and refurbish them into these strange little boxes. I mean, I would love to know the story of all of these. I mean, you can almost start to ask yourself, I mean, what was the movie for this? Highly symbolic director. Everything he did in his films was weighted with a kind of symbolism most people in the West really don't understand. And I think that it says something. So, when you look in these boxes, and I'm purposely not spending, I took photos of these boxes. I could stop and let you really look at them for quite a while. And if you want to, you can stop the frame anytime and look. But my feeling is you should go, this is a great reason to go to Armenia and visit this museum, especially if you are a Sergei Parajanov devotee. So yes, Parajanov. I mean, what could this be? I mean, it just suggests so many different things, and very tactile. I mean, he's definitely in line with people like Schrankmeyer, the Quay brothers, and one of his best friends was Andrei Tarkovsky. And Tarkovsky thought he was one of the greatest directors. They both died around the same time, near the end of the 80s, and yeah, it's amazing. This is an image from one of his films, The Color of Pomegranates. Notice that the frame, the camera doesn't move. And this film, you should really spend time watching this film. I would say it's a good introduction. Because he makes you ask what you're watching. He makes you ask about the fabric. He makes you ask about the what you're actually looking at. I mean, I would say both Tarkovsky and Parajanov are both poets of the cinema. That is to say, they're not trying to tell necessarily straight-ahead stories. I mean, their styles are completely different, and yet one can see this poetic approach to cinema. Meanwhile, back in the museum, that's when I realized, oh, there's an upstairs. Let's go upstairs. So this is on the second floor. Lots more collages, and there's a collage made with bits of glass. He would just find things and put them together. The mirror, for instance. Really restless, but he couldn't make that many films. The Soviets really, I think he spent 5 years in hard labor it's I mean, I would suggest researching his life. It's quite fascinating. And yet another room. And there are actually several rooms up here. The boxes are primarily all on the base, on the bottom floor, and this is more of his art and collages, and it is fascinating, but I'm not going to spend quite as much time on it. But again, it's the approach to texture. And also I mean, it's just like he was just relentless. So some of this commemorates some of his films. There's the actual, that kind of warrior skull you saw in The Color of Pomegranates, or Sayat Nova. And you can see also in the framing, kind of an iconic use of art. Kind of still, meditative. That's amazing. What, gas masks and elephants? More art, more collages. And again, puppets, toys. But none of this is just like silly little ironic stuff. I mean, this is not what Americans do for postmodern irony. This is very, very serious in terms of the way he was approaching it. This is another room filled with a lot of his paraphernalia. And of course, there's like a full mannequin sitting there. Which I identify with. I actually found a mannequin in New York before I left and took it with me to Alaska. So somewhere in my stuff is a full mannequin. Another toy. But then you get to things like, there's a photo coming up of like Jesus Christ with a cigarette in his mouth. Now, I have no idea where this came from. I don't think he made this image, but it's almost like, it's like this rough-hewn image of Jesus as like a construction worker or something like that, which is interesting. So before you leave the museum, though, make sure you look around outside in the courtyard, because there's even more interesting stuff there, including a statue of him, which is quite impressive, a bust of him. But yeah, and all of this stuff is, I mean, obviously he didn't make the image of him, but a lot of this stuff was either stuff he owned or stuff that he made. And there's more art outside, decaying on the walls very aesthetically. What were these about? No idea. There's a nice tree here, and more importantly, go upstairs. Now, there is, I suppose, a way to get from the upstairs balcony there back into the museum, but I'm pretty sure it's locked. But the important part about going upstairs here is that there's a really interesting work of art all the way at the end of the top balcony here. And it's right down there. But there's also other stuff to look at. It's just a fascinating place to explore. And I highly recommend, when you go to Armenia and when you go to Yerevan, do not miss the Sergei Parajanov Museum. Especially if you have any sensitivity about contemporary art or film. This is like an absolute must. I would say, if it was a choice between this and the National History Museum, I'd go here easily. And outside the museum on my way back, I get a view of the landscape near the museum. And again, this is Yerevan. It's just a busy kind of working city. I have to confess, I didn't go to the whole city. I spent one day there, and then I was going to go back to the train and go back to Tbilisi. And again, I'm here to get my passport stamped. But really feels like a Soviet holdover in many ways. It just feels like apart from the weather, even if you imagine this with sunshine and the foliage back in it, it's still gonna feel kind of gray. Oh, watch out. Sirens. Yeah, these are typical streets. They're straighter than the ones in Tbilisi. Tbilisi feels crowded with people, crazy traffic. This feels more organized in a kind of a humdrum sort of way. This is just the streets I walk down. If there was an old part of town that was humming with life, and there may have been, I didn't get there yet. If I am going to go back, so if you know more about the city, where I should have gone, where other people should go, please talk about it. I did stop here at what is evidently the Old Ringer Tavern. Why has it got an English name? For some Armenian food. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. On the way back to the train station, I stopped at this market to spend some of my dram. And then I ended up back at the Yerevan train station, get back on the train, where we had a rather crazy woman playing Armenian comedy.
Life is a cucumber. Today's in your hands, hands, hands. Tomorrow in your ass, ass, ass.
Life is a cucumber, indeed. I have no. It's just the craziest thing. It's like in Armenian, then pow! It's in English, kind of off-color comments. Just crazy comedy. Anyway, it took about 2 hours going through the border again, and I made a discovery. I thought I would have to come do this every year, but it turns out that the date of the expiration on my permit was in 2024. I didn't even need to do this trip, but it was worth doing anyway. And I didn't show them this permit I have. I just wanted to see how it worked with the passports. And indeed, you can stay 365 days in Georgia, go over the border, come back, get your passport stamped, and no one says anything. There was almost no questioning whatsoever. So, that was my trip to Yerevan. I thought Yerevan was an interesting town, but Tbilisi is much more interesting. And Yerevan felt like it was something out of the old Soviet Union with a little bit of extra modern spice added to it. Whereas Tbilisi feels like this chaotic new thing, and I think that's why I'm here. I enjoy the chaos. I enjoy the people here. I did meet at least one nice person, Nare, in Yerevan at the Sergei Parajanov Museum. But it was just a different kind of a vibe altogether. And I really did enjoy the bookstore there. That was probably better than any bookstore here. So there were pluses to being there. And I will get back in time, and I will also journey further into Armenia someday. But anyway, thanks for coming along with me on Georgian Crossroads. And indeed, it was an easy trip to get from Tbilisi to Yerevan. And I highly recommend the journey. It's a good place to go if you're in Tbilisi for a while. So this is Byrne for Georgian Crossroads saying, Droebit. I'll see you soon.